The millionaire comes home early, and when looking for his 6-year-old daughter, the housekeeper covers his mouth and says, "Be quiet, don't say anything. Your daughter is doing something shocking in her room." The reason leaves him in disbelief. Subscribe to the channel and comment where you're watching from. The late afternoon sun filtered through the floor-to-ceiling windows of the Malibu mansion, casting long shadows across the marble foyer as David Chen pulled his Tesla Model S into the circular driveway. At 38, he carried himself with the confident stride of someone who had built a tech empire from nothing. His company, NeuralSync, had revolutionized cloud computing infrastructure and made him one of Silicon Valley's youngest billionaires. His sharp jawline and penetrating dark eyes reflected the intensity that had driven him since his early 20s, working 18-hour days to escape the poverty of his immigrant upbringing. Tuesday afternoons were usually reserved for board meetings, but a crucial client had cancelled, leaving David with an unexpected window of free time. As he approached the front door of his sprawling contemporary home, 6,000 square feet of glass, steel, and carefully curated modern art, he noticed his hands trembling slightly. These unplanned moments at home always unsettled him. Without the familiar rhythm of conference calls and strategic planning sessions, he was forced to confront the echoing silence that had filled the house since Elena's death 2 years ago. "Mr. Chen," the voice belonged to Carmen Rodriguez, a woman in her early 50s whose weathered hands told the story of a life spent caring for others. She had emigrated from a small town in El Salvador 25 years ago, leaving behind everything she knew to build a better future for her children. Her graying hair was pulled back in a neat bun, and her kind brown eyes usually sparkled with warmth. But today, something was different. David paused as he set his laptop bag down on the Italian leather bench in the entryway. Carmen's face was pale, her usual composed demeanor replaced by an expression of barely contained urgency. She stood frozen in the hallway leading to the main staircase, one hand pressed against the wall as if steadying herself. "Carmen, what's wrong?" David's voice carried the sharp edge he typically reserved for underperforming employees. After Elena's passing, he had become hypersensitive to any disruption in his carefully ordered world. The slightest deviation from routine sent his anxiety spiraling. Carmen raised her finger to her lips in a desperate gesture for silence, her eyes wide with something between fear and wonder. "Shh! Please, Mr. Chen. Don't call out to her." "Call out to who? What are you talking about?" David's patience was wearing thin. He had learned to distrust anything that couldn't be explained through logic and data. His analytical mind immediately began cataloging potential scenarios. Was there an intruder? Had something happened to his daughter Lily? "She's upstairs," Carmen whispered, her voice barely audible. "In her bedroom. She's playing." David's brow furrowed. Playing was normal. Lily often spent her afternoons with dolls or coloring books. "Carmen, I don't understand why—" "No, Mr. Chen, you don't understand." Carmen's voice cracked with emotion. "She's playing the piano, really playing it." The words hit David like a physical blow. The piano, a stunning Steinway Model B that Elena had insisted on buying, sat in Lily's room more as an expensive piece of furniture than a musical instrument. Elena had dreamed of lessons for their daughter someday, but after the accident, the piano had remained untouched, a painful reminder of plans that would never be fulfilled. "That's impossible," David said flatly. "Lily doesn't know how to play piano. She's never had a lesson." Carmen's eyes filled with tears. "I know it sounds crazy, but you have to hear this. I've been watching her for 3 weeks now, every day at the same time. I was afraid to tell you because I knew you wouldn't believe me." David felt his chest tighten. Carmen had been with their family for over 3 years, and her devotion to Lily was unquestionable. She had never lied to him, never exaggerated. But this was beyond rational explanation. "Show me," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. Carmen led him up the sweeping staircase, past the gallery wall, lined with family photos that David had been meaning to take down, but couldn't bring himself to touch. The second floor of the house was designed around Lily's needs: her bedroom, a playroom, and a small library where Elena used to read bedtime stories. As they approached Lily's door, which was painted a soft pink that Elena had chosen, David could hear something that made his breath catch in his throat. Music. Not the simple plinking of a child experimenting with keys, but complex, layered music with intricate melodies and sophisticated harmonies. The sound drifted through the slightly open door like something from a concert hall. David pressed his back against the hallway wall, his heart pounding so hard he was certain Carmen could hear it. Through the narrow gap in the doorway, he could see his 6-year-old daughter Lily sitting at the piano bench, her small frame silhouetted against the window that overlooked the Pacific Ocean. Her long black hair, so much like Eleanor's, fell in waves down her back. Her tiny fingers moved across the keys with impossible precision and grace. The piece she was playing was hauntingly beautiful. David recognized it as Chopin's Nocturne, in E-flat major, a composition that typically took years of intensive study to master. But Lily wasn't just playing the notes. She was interpreting them with emotional depth that seemed far beyond her years. Her eyes were closed, and her face held an expression of peaceful concentration that David had never seen before. "How long has this been going on?" David whispered, his voice hoarse with disbelief. "Every day for 3 weeks," Carmen replied. "Always at 3 o'clock, always for exactly 1 hour. She's never played anything like this before, Mr. Chen. One day she just started." David watched his daughter's small hands navigate the complex passages with flawless technique. Her posture was perfect, her timing impeccable. It was as if she had been born knowing how to play, as if the music was flowing through her from some divine source. "Has she said anything to you about this? About where she learned it?" Carmen shook her head. "You know how she is since Mrs. Chen passed. She barely speaks to anyone except you and me, but when she plays, it's like she's talking to someone we can't see." The realization hit David like a tsunami. 3 o'clock in the afternoon. That was exactly when Elena used to do her daily yoga routine in the living room downstairs, always with classical music playing softly in the background. Elena had been a professional dancer before they met, and music had been the soundtrack to her life. She had often talked about the healing power of music, how it could express emotions that words never could. As Lily's performance reached its crescendo, David felt tears streaming down his face, tears he hadn't allowed himself to shed since the funeral. His daughter, his precious, silent daughter who had barely spoken since losing her mother, was communicating through music with a skill that defied every logical explanation he could conjure. When the last note faded into silence, Lily opened her eyes and slowly turned toward the door. For a moment, father and daughter locked eyes across the threshold. In that instant, David saw something in Lily's gaze that both broke his heart and filled him with wonder, a depth of understanding and pain that no 6-year-old should possess, but also a glimmer of something transcendent, something that connected her to her mother in ways he was only beginning to comprehend. Lily smiled softly, the first genuine smile he had seen from her in months, then quietly closed the piano lid and walked to her bookshelf as if nothing extraordinary had happened. David stood frozen in the hallway, his entire understanding of his daughter, and perhaps of reality itself, fundamentally shaken. The sleepless nights that followed were filled with David's obsessive need to understand what he had witnessed. His analytical mind, which had built algorithms capable of processing millions of data points, couldn't accept the inexplicable nature of his daughter's talent. By Thursday morning, he had already ordered a comprehensive security system upgrade, specifically requesting cameras with audio recording capabilities for Lily's room. "I need discreet installation," David told Marcus Webb, the security consultant who had handled his corporate offices. Marcus was a former FBI agent whose granite features and methodical approach had earned David's trust over the years. "The subject can't know she's being monitored." Marcus raised an eyebrow as he reviewed the mansion's blueprints spread across David's home office desk. The room itself was a testament to David's success. Leather-bound first editions, lined mahogany shelves, and original Basquiat paintings adorned the walls. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of the Pacific, where surfers dotted the waves like distant prayers. "This is about your daughter, isn't it?" Marcus asked, his gravelly voice carrying a note of concern. "David, I have to ask, is there something going on that I should know about? Child safety is not something I take lightly." David's jaw tightened. "It's not what you're thinking. I need to document something extraordinary that's happening, something that defies explanation. I'm not exploiting my daughter. I'm trying to protect her." "Protect her from what?" "From people who might not believe what I've seen. From those who might try to exploit her if word gets out." David's voice dropped to a whisper. "Marcus, what would you say if I told you my 6-year-old daughter, who has never had a single piano lesson, is playing Chopin with the skill of a conservatory graduate?" Marcus studied David's face for a long moment. In their 5-year professional relationship, he had never seen the tech mogul look so vulnerable, so desperate for someone to believe him. "I'd say that's either the most elaborate hoax I've ever heard, or you've got yourself a genuine mystery," Marcus replied. "Either way, I'll install your cameras. But David, be careful what you're looking for. Sometimes the answers we find aren't the ones we want." By Friday afternoon, the installation was complete. Hidden cameras, no larger than shirt buttons, were strategically placed to capture every angle of Lily's room while remaining invisible to the naked eye. The audio equipment was state-of-the-art, capable of recording the subtle nuances of musical performance. Carmen had watched the installation with growing anxiety, wringing her dish towel between her weathered hands. "Mr. Chen, maybe we should just let her be. Some things aren't meant to be understood, just accepted." David turned from the monitor, displaying the camera feeds. "Carmen, I built my entire career on the principle that everything has an explanation. Every phenomenon, no matter how mysterious, has underlying causes that can be identified and analyzed." "But what if you're wrong?" Carmen's voice carried the weight of her years, the wisdom of someone who had witnessed life's inexplicable moments. "What if some gifts are meant to remain sacred, untouched by our need to understand them?" That afternoon, as 3 o'clock approached, David positioned himself in his home office with multiple screens displaying different angles of Lily's room. His hands shook as he started the recording software, feeling both like a protective father and an intrusive voyeur. At exactly 3 hours p.m., Lily entered her room. She moved with the same quiet grace she had inherited from Eleanor, her small feet silent on the plush carpet. Without hesitation, she walked directly to the piano and lifted the lid with reverent care. David leaned forward, his breath catching as he watched his daughter settle onto the bench. Through the high-definition cameras, he could see every detail. The way she adjusted her posture, the deliberate placement of her hands above the keys, the moment of absolute stillness before she began to play. The music that filled the room was Debussy's Clair de Lune, its ethereal melody floating through the speakers with heartbreaking beauty. But what struck David most profoundly was Lily's expression. Her eyes were closed, and her face held a look of pure serenity that he had not seen since before Elena's death. It was as if the music was washing away her pain, connecting her to something beyond the physical world. My God, David whispered, watching his daughter's tiny fingers navigate the complex passages with impossible precision. The recording captured every nuance, the subtle dynamics, the perfect timing, the emotional interpretation that spoke of years of training she had never received. As the piece reached its climactic section, David noticed something that made his blood run cold. Lily's lips were moving as if she were having a conversation with someone. He enhanced the audio, straining to hear words that were barely above a whisper.
"I miss you, Mummy." Lily's voice was so soft it was almost lost beneath the music. "I remember how you used to dance when you played music downstairs. Are you dancing now? Can you hear me playing for you?" David's hands flew to his mouth, stifling a sob that threatened to escape.
The revelation hit him like a physical blow. His daughter wasn't just playing music, she was using it as a bridge to communicate with her deceased mother. The piano had become her sanctuary, the one place where she felt connected to Elena's spirit. The recording continued for exactly 1 hour. When Lily finished, she sat in silence for several minutes, her small shoulders occasionally shaking with what David realized were tears. Then, with the same quiet grace, she closed the piano lid and moved to her bookshelf, selecting a picture book Elena used to read to her. David spent the weekend reviewing the footage obsessively, analyzing every frame, every note, every subtle expression that crossed his daughter's face. The technical perfection of her playing was undeniable, but it was the emotional content that left him reeling. Lily was processing her grief through music in ways that years of child therapy had failed to achieve. On Sunday evening, as Carmen prepared to leave for her weekend break, David called her into his office. The screens still displayed frozen images of Lily at the piano, her face illuminated by the golden afternoon light. "Carmen, I owe you an apology," David said, his voice heavy with exhaustion and emotion. "You tried to tell me something miraculous was happening, and I responded with skepticism and analysis." Carmen settled into the leather chair across from his desk, her maternal instincts evident in her concerned expression. "Mr. Chen, that little girl has been carrying so much pain. Maybe this music is God's way of helping her heal." "But how is it possible?" David's voice cracked with frustration. "I've built my entire worldview on logic and evidence. This defies everything I understand about human development, about learning, about the nature of talent itself." "But maybe that's the point," Carmen replied gently. "Maybe Lily is teaching you that not everything in life can be explained or controlled. Maybe she's showing you that love, the love between a mother and daughter, doesn't die just because the body stops breathing." David stared at the monitors, watching the recorded image of his daughter's face transformed by music. For the first time since Elena's death, he began to consider the possibility that there were forces in the universe beyond his comprehension, mysteries that demanded not analysis, but acceptance. "What do I do now?" he asked, the question directed as much to himself as to Carmen. "You love her," Carmen said simply. "You protect her gift without trying to possess it. And maybe, just maybe, you learn to listen to what the music is really telling you." That night, David lay awake in his empty king-sized bed, Elena's pillow still carrying the faint scent of her lavender perfume. Through the walls, he could almost hear the echo of that afternoon's performance, and for the first time in 2 years, he allowed himself to believe that some part of Elena might still be present, watching over their daughter through the language of music that had always been her first love. Dr. Margaret Whitfield had spent 43 years of her life devoted to the piano, transforming raw talent into world-class artistry from her studio in the heart of Beverly Hills. At 72, her silver hair was always pulled back in an elegant chignon, and her piercing blue eyes had evaluated thousands of aspiring musicians. Her Steinway Concert Grand dominated the space where legends like Joshua Bell and Yo-Yo Ma had once practiced as children under her tutelage. When David Chen called her on a rainy Monday morning in April, requesting an urgent consultation, Margaret almost declined. Since her husband Charles had passed away from cancer the previous year, she had been accepting fewer students, finding solace only in her morning walks through the rose garden they had cultivated together for 3 decades. Dr. Whitfield, I need someone to evaluate my daughter's musical abilities. David's voice carried an urgency that intrigued her. I've seen your work with child prodigies, and I need an expert opinion on something unprecedented. Margaret adjusted her reading glasses and glanced at the wall lined with photographs of her former students performing at Carnegie Hall and Lincoln Center. Mr. Chen, I appreciate your confidence in my expertise, but I must tell you that true musical prodigies are extraordinarily rare. Most parents believe their children possess exceptional talent when they're simply displaying normal developmental progress. I understand your skepticism, David replied, his voice tight with controlled emotion. But I'm not most parents, and this isn't normal developmental progress. Dr. Whitfield, what would you say if I told you my 6-year-old daughter is playing Chopin nocturnes with perfect technique, despite never having received a single lesson? The phone line fell silent. Margaret had heard similar claims before, usually from overzealous parents whose children could barely manage "Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star." But something in David's voice, a mixture of desperation and awe, gave her pause. Mr. Chen, that would be impossible unless we're dealing with something truly extraordinary. Margaret's academic curiosity began to override her initial skepticism. I've encountered perhaps 2 or 3 cases in my entire career where children displayed inexplicable musical abilities. Each instance was connected to significant emotional trauma. My wife died in a car accident 2 years ago, David said quietly. Lily was 4 when it happened. She's been largely silent since then, speaking only to our housekeeper and me. Margaret felt a familiar ache in her chest. Grief had its own language, one she had been learning intimately since Charles's death. I'll see your daughter, Mr. Chen, but I must warn you, if what you're describing is real, it will change everything about how you understand your child. 3 days later, Margaret arrived at the Malibu mansion, driving her vintage Mercedes sedan, the same car Charles had surprised her with for their 20th anniversary. The contemporary architecture struck her as cold and impersonal, lacking the warmth of the Victorian home where she and Charles had raised their own children. David met her at the front door, his usually composed demeanor betraying signs of sleepless nights. His expensive suit couldn't disguise the weight of uncertainty he carried. Dr. Whitfield, thank you for coming. I should prepare you. What you're about to hear will challenge everything you think you know about musical development. Margaret followed David through the mansion's pristine hallways, past abstract art that probably cost more than most people's homes. But as they approached the staircase, she heard something that made her stop in her tracks, the faint sound of piano music drifting from the 2nd floor. Is that a recording? Margaret asked, her trained ear immediately recognizing the piece as Debussy's Reverie. David's face was grim. No recording. That's Lily. They climbed the stairs in silence, the music growing clearer with each step. Margaret's professional instincts were already analyzing what she heard. The phrasing was mature, the dynamics sophisticated, the emotional interpretation far beyond what any 6-year-old should be capable of producing. Outside Lily's partially open door, Margaret peered inside and felt her breath catch. A tiny girl with long black hair sat at a magnificent Steinway, her small frame dwarfed by the instrument. But her playing was transcendent. Dear God, Margaret whispered, her hand instinctively reaching for the wall to steady herself. In 4 decades of teaching, she had never witnessed anything like this. The child's technique was flawless. Her posture, hand position, and finger movements displayed years of training that, according to David, had never occurred. But beyond the technical proficiency was something that made Margaret's eyes fill with tears. The music was alive with emotion, as if each note carried the weight of unspoken grief and love. When the piece concluded, Lily opened her eyes and turned toward the door. Her gaze met Margaret's with startling directness, and the older woman saw depths of understanding that no child should possess. "Hello," Lily said softly, her voice barely above a whisper. "Are you here to listen to my music for Mommy?" Margaret felt her professional composure crumbling. She entered the room slowly, approaching the piano with the reverence she might show in a cathedral. "Hello, Lily. My name is Dr. Whitfield. That was the most beautiful playing I've ever heard from someone your age." Lily tilted her head with curiosity. "Daddy says I'm not supposed to know how to play, but the music just comes when I think about Mommy dancing downstairs. She used to dance to music like this when I was little. Can you show me how you learned that piece?" Margaret asked gently, settling into a chair beside the piano. "I didn't learn it," Lily replied with the matter-of-fact honesty of childhood. "I just remember it. When I put my hands on the keys and think about Mommy, the music happens by itself." Margaret exchanged a meaningful glance with David, who stood in the doorway, looking like a man whose entire worldview had been shattered. She had encountered this phenomenon only twice before in her career, children who seemed to access musical knowledge through emotional channels that bypassed traditional learning. "Lily, would you mind playing something else for me?" Margaret asked. "Perhaps something you've never heard before." "I don't really choose what to play," Lily said, her small fingers already moving to the keys. "The music chooses me." What followed was a performance of Mozart's Piano Sonata No. 11 that left Margaret speechless. The child played with such intuitive understanding of the composer's intentions that it seemed impossible. Every phrase was shaped with purpose, every dynamic marking executed with precision that conservatory students struggled to achieve. "How is this possible?" David asked when Lily finished and quietly left the room to play in her adjoining space. Margaret removed her glasses and wiped them with shaking hands. "Mr. Chen, I've seen 2 similar cases in my career. Both involved children who had experienced profound loss and somehow accessed musical abilities that seemed to come from beyond their conscious minds. One was a 7-year-old boy whose father died in the Iraq War. He began playing military hymns on his grandfather's harmonica with impossible skill. The other was a 9-year-old girl who lost her twin sister to leukemia and started composing complex symphonic pieces. What happened to them? The boy eventually became a professional musician, but the supernatural quality of his playing faded as he grew older and processed his grief. The girl continued composing, but her music became more conventional as she received formal training. Margaret paused, choosing her words carefully. In both cases, the extraordinary abilities seemed connected to unresolved emotional trauma. As they healed psychologically, their miraculous talents evolved into merely exceptional ones. David slumped against the doorframe. "So you're telling me that helping Lily heal emotionally might cause her to lose this gift?" "I'm telling you that this gift may be her way of processing trauma that she can't express in words," Margaret replied. "The question isn't whether she'll lose the ability, it's whether suppressing it or exploiting it could cause more psychological damage than letting it exist." Naturally, Margaret spent another hour with Lily, documenting her abilities and observing her emotional state during performance. The child's connection to music was unlike anything in her professional experience. It seemed to transcend technique and enter the realm of spiritual communication. As Margaret prepared to leave, she pulled David aside in his home office. "Mr. Chen, your daughter possesses something extraordinary, but it's fragile. This isn't just talent. It's her way of maintaining a connection to her mother's memory. If you try to turn this into a career or a public spectacle, you risk destroying the very thing that's helping her survive her grief." David nodded, but Margaret could see the conflict in his eyes. She recognized the look, the same expression Charles had worn when faced with medical decisions that had no clear right answers. "What would you do if she were your daughter?" David asked. Margaret looked out the window toward the ocean, where the setting sun painted the sky in shades of pink and gold that reminded her of the watercolors Charles used to paint in their garden. "I would love her exactly as she is," Margaret said finally. "And I would trust that whatever force gave her this gift will also guide her toward healing when she's ready." Dr. Sarah Martinez had been Lily's pediatrician since birth, watching the bright, curious infant grow into a thoughtful toddler before tragedy struck their family. Her office in Santa Monica was deliberately designed to feel welcoming rather than clinical. Walls painted in soothing pastels, child-friendly artwork, and a reading corner filled with books that Elena Chen had often browsed while waiting for appointments. At 45, Dr. Martinez carried herself with the confident grace of someone who had dedicated her life to children's well-being. Her dark hair was streaked with premature silver, earned through countless nights worrying about her young patients. She had chosen pediatric medicine after losing her own younger brother to a rare genetic condition when she was in medical school, vowing to be the kind of doctor who treated the whole child, not just symptoms. When David called requesting an urgent consultation about Lily's unusual behavior, Dr. Martinez cleared her afternoon schedule. She had been concerned about the little girl's development since Elena's death, particularly the selective mutism that had emerged in the months following the tragedy. "David, please sit down," Dr. Martinez said as he paced nervously around her office on Thursday afternoon. His usually immaculate appearance was disheveled, his tie loosened, his hair uncombed, and dark circles under his eyes suggesting several sleepless nights. "You mentioned on the phone that Lily has been displaying some concerning behaviors. Can you be more specific?" David stopped pacing and turned to face her, his expression a mixture of wonder and terror. "Sarah, what I'm about to tell you will sound impossible, but I have video evidence. Lily has been playing classical piano with professional-level skill, despite never having had a single lesson." Dr. Martinez had known David for 6 years, and she had never seen him look so unmoored. His analytical mind, which had built a technology empire, seemed unable to process what he was experiencing with his daughter. "David, children often surprise us with their abilities. Sometimes they pick up skills by observation that we don't realize they've absorbed. Has Lily been exposed to piano music or instruction that you might have forgotten about?" "Sarah, you don't understand." David pulled out his phone and showed her a video recorded the previous day. "Watch this. Really watch it." The footage showed Lily at her piano, playing what Dr. Martinez recognized as a complex classical piece. Even through the phone's speakers, the music was hauntingly beautiful. But what struck the pediatrician most was the child's posture and hand positioning, perfect technique that typically took years to develop. "My God," Dr. Martinez whispered, replaying the video. "David, this is extraordinary. When did this start?" "About a month ago. Every day at 3 p.m. for exactly 1 hour. She plays pieces I know she's never heard before, with interpretation that would impress conservatory professors." David's voice cracked with emotion. "But that's not the most unsettling part. I've caught her talking to Elena during these sessions, as if her mother were there in the room." Dr. Martinez felt a chill run down her spine. As a medical professional, she was trained to look for logical explanations. But as a human being who had witnessed the mysterious ways children process trauma, she knew they were dealing with something beyond conventional understanding. "David, I need to ask you some difficult questions, and I need you to answer honestly." Has Lily displayed any other unusual behaviors? Changes in sleep patterns, appetite, social interaction? She's actually been more peaceful during the day, but she started having vivid dreams that she describes in detail the next morning. Dreams about Elena teaching her to play piano in a place she calls the music room in the sky. David sat down heavily, in the chair across from Dr. Martinez's desk. Sarah, I built my career on logical thinking. This is destroying everything I thought I understood about reality. Dr. Martinez opened Lily's medical file, reviewing the notes she had made over the past 2 years. The child's development had been textbook normal until Elena's death, when she had retreated into selective mutism and displayed signs of complicated grief. David, from a medical perspective, there are documented cases of children developing extraordinary abilities following traumatic events. The phenomenon is called acquired savant syndrome, though it's extremely rare and not fully understood by the scientific community. Are you saying this is a medical condition? Chase, I'm saying that trauma can sometimes unlock latent abilities or create new neural pathways that allow access to skills that seem impossible. Dr. Martinez chose her words carefully. In some cases, children who experience profound loss develop heightened abilities in areas that provide emotional comfort or connection to their lost loved one. David leaned forward intently. What are the long-term implications? Is this healthy for her, or should I be concerned about her psychological well-being? Dr. Martinez had been dreading this question. In her 20 years of practice, she had learned that parents facing inexplicable situations with their children often sought simple answers to complex problems. The honest answer is that we don't know enough about cases like Lily's to make definitive predictions. What I can tell you is that her musical activity seems to be providing emotional regulation that she's been unable to achieve through traditional grief processing. Dr. Martinez paused, watching David's reaction. The concerning part would be if we tried to suppress this outlet before she had developed other coping mechanisms. But what if it's unhealthy? What if she's retreating into a fantasy world instead of accepting her mother's death? Then, David, children don't process loss the way adults do. For Lily, this music may be her way of maintaining a healthy connection to Elena's memory, while gradually learning to function without her physical presence. Dr. Martinez pulled up research articles on her computer. There's actually compelling evidence that children who maintain symbolic connections to deceased parents often have better long-term psychological outcomes than those who are forced to move on according to adult timelines. David studied the research abstracts Dr. Martinez showed him, his scientific background helping him understand the complexity of childhood grief processing. But his emotional turmoil as a father made it difficult to think objectively. Sarah, I need to ask you something that's been keeping me awake at night. Is it possible that Elena is somehow present during these musical sessions? I know how that sounds, but Lily's descriptions of their conversations are so detailed, so specific to things only Elena would know. Dr. Martinez had encountered this question before with grieving families, and she had learned to navigate the delicate balance between medical objectivity and respect for experiences that defied scientific explanation. From a purely medical standpoint, I can tell you that Lily's brain is processing her memories of Elena and creating experiences that feel completely real to her. Whether that constitutes actual spiritual contact is beyond the scope of medical science. Dr. Martinez's voice softened. What I can say is that these experiences are clearly providing comfort and helping her maintain emotional stability. But should I encourage this, or try to redirect her toward more conventional grieving processes? David, my recommendation is that we monitor Lily's overall functioning, her sleep, appetite, social interactions, and general mood, rather than focusing specifically on the musical phenomenon. If these other areas remain stable or improve, then the music is likely serving a healthy purpose. Dr. Martinez spent another 30 minutes discussing strategies for supporting Lily's emotional development while respecting her unique grieving process. She emphasized the importance of not pressuring the child to explain or perform her musical abilities, which could disrupt the natural healing function they seem to serve. As David prepared to leave, Dr. Martinez touched his arm gently. "David, I want you to consider something. Maybe the question isn't whether this is medically explainable, but whether it's helping Lily heal. Sometimes the most profound healing happens through means we don't fully understand. What if people find out? What if there's media attention or pressure to exploit her abilities?" Dr. Martinez's expression grew serious. "Then you protect her the way any parent would protect a child with a rare condition. You control access, you maintain privacy, and you make decisions based on her well-being rather than public curiosity or financial opportunity." That evening, Dr. Martinez sat in her own quiet office long after her staff had gone home, reviewing everything she knew about childhood trauma and recovery. In her 2 decades of practice, she had learned to trust the mysterious ways children found paths toward healing, even when those paths defied conventional medical understanding. She pulled up Lily's file one more time, adding a note that would become crucial in the months ahead. Patient displaying extraordinary musical abilities following maternal loss. Recommend supportive monitoring rather than intervention. Child's emotional regulation appears significantly improved during musical activity. Suggest protecting this coping mechanism while continuing to monitor overall psychological development. As she drove home through the Santa Monica evening traffic, Dr. Martinez found herself thinking about her own brother, taken too young by circumstances beyond anyone's control. Perhaps, she thought, love found ways to transcend physical boundaries that medical science was only beginning to understand. The leak began with what seemed like an innocent conversation at the annual Beverly Hills Arts Foundation Gala, held in the opulent ballroom of the Four Seasons Hotel. Dr. Margaret Whitfield, still processing the extraordinary encounter with Lily Chen, had been nursing a glass of wine when approached by Victoria Sterling, a prominent socialite known for her connections to the entertainment industry. "Margaret, darling, you look absolutely radiant tonight," Victoria said, her perfectly veneered smile masking the calculating intelligence that had made her one of Los Angeles' most successful social climbers. At 52, Victoria had parlayed her marriage to a studio executive into her own media empire, specializing in discovering and promoting child talents. "I heard through the grapevine that you've taken on a rather exceptional new student." Dr. Whitfield, still emotionally raw from her afternoon with Lily, had let her guard down. "Victoria, I've encountered something truly remarkable. A child whose musical abilities defy every conventional understanding of talent development." "How fascinating," Victoria purred, her predatory instincts immediately engaged. "Tell me more." By the time Dr. Whitfield realized her mistake, she had already shared enough details for Victoria to begin her research. Within hours, Victoria had identified the Chen family and begun formulating a plan that would transform a private family's miracle into public entertainment. 3 days later, Alexis Kane sat in her corner office at Gold Star Entertainment, reviewing the quarterly ratings reports that had been keeping her awake at night. At 38, she was the youngest executive producer in the company's history, having clawed her way up from assistant to decision-maker through a combination of ruthless ambition and an uncanny ability to identify stories that captured public imagination. Her show, America's Hidden Miracles, had once dominated primetime ratings by featuring extraordinary individuals whose talents seemed to defy explanation. But lately, the show had struggled to find stories compelling enough to compete with reality TV and streaming services. Alexis needed something spectacular, something that would remind network executives why they had given her the biggest budget in unscripted television. When Victoria Sterling called with information about a 6-year-old piano prodigy in Malibu, Alexis felt the familiar rush of adrenaline that accompanied a potential hit story. "Victoria, if you're wasting my time with another stage mom pushing her mediocre kid, I'm going to be very unhappy," Alexis said, pacing behind her desk while overlooking the studio lot where countless dreams had been manufactured and destroyed. "Alexis, darling, I would never bring you anything ordinary. This child has never had a lesson, yet she plays Chopin like a concert pianist. The family is wealthy enough to be above suspicion of fraud, and there's a tragic backstory involving the mother's death that will have audiences sobbing." Alexis stopped pacing. "Send me everything you have." Within 2 hours, Alexis had assembled her research team, a group of investigators whose job was to verify stories before production began. What they discovered about the Chen family exceeded even her ambitious expectations. David Chen's reputation as a tech innovator was impeccable, making him an unlikely candidate for elaborate hoaxes. Dr. Margaret Whitfield's credentials were beyond reproach, and her obvious reluctance to discuss the case only added to its credibility. Most importantly, preliminary inquiries suggested that the family was actively avoiding publicity, which made them infinitely more appealing to Alexis than families who sought media attention. "I want that story," Alexis told her team during their Friday morning meeting. "I don't care what it takes." The first approach came through David's corporate office on a Monday morning that had started like any other. His assistant, Jennifer, buzzed through on the intercom with barely concealed excitement. "Mr. Chen, I have someone from Gold Star Entertainment on line 2. She says it's regarding an extraordinary opportunity for your family." David's blood ran cold. He had been dreading this moment since Dr. Whitfield's assessment, knowing that extraordinary stories had a way of becoming public, despite all efforts at privacy. "Mr. Chen, this is Alexis Kane from Gold Star Entertainment. I'm calling about your daughter's remarkable musical abilities." "I'm sorry, but you must be mistaken. My daughter is a private citizen, and our family doesn't seek media attention." David's voice carried the authoritative tone he used in business negotiations, but internally he was panicking. "Mr. Chen, I completely understand your desire for privacy, but what I'm offering could be life-changing for your family. Prime time, exposure, potential recording contracts, educational opportunities that money can't buy. Lily could inspire millions of children around the world. Ms. Kane, I need to be absolutely clear. My daughter is not available for media exploitation, regardless of how you frame the opportunity. Do not contact my family again. Mr. Chen, with respect, this story is going to come out whether you cooperate or not. Wouldn't you prefer to have some control over how it's presented?" David hung up, his hands shaking with rage and fear. He immediately called his corporate attorney, Robert Morrison, a Harvard law graduate whose intimidating presence had protected David's interests for over a decade. "Robert, I need you to send a cease and desist letter to Gold Star Entertainment. They're attempting to exploit my daughter without permission." "David, I can send the letter, but you need to understand that if this story is already circulating, in media circles, legal threats might only increase their interest. Sometimes, the harder you fight to keep something private, the more valuable it becomes to journalists." The letter bought them exactly 3 days of peace before Alexis escalated her approach. Unable to secure cooperation from the family, she dispatched a team of investigators to gather information through other sources. Carmen Rodriguez was hanging laundry in the mansion's backyard when she noticed a woman with a camera watching from the public beach access point below the property. When approached by someone claiming to be a journalist writing about musical education, Carmen's instincts immediately warned her of danger. "I don't know anything about music," Carmen told the woman firmly, "and the Chen family values their privacy." But the investigator was persistent, offering increasingly large sums of money for any information about Lily's abilities. When Carmen reported the incident to David, they both realized that their quiet sanctuary was under siege. The breaking point came when a photographer managed to capture long-range footage of Lily playing piano through her bedroom window. The image, a small silhouette at a grand piano, backlit by golden afternoon sunlight, became the centerpiece of Alexis Kane's campaign to tell the story with or without family cooperation. "Ladies and gentlemen," Alexis announced during her weekly pitch meeting with network executives, "I present to you the story that will define our network for the next decade. A 6-year-old girl whose musical abilities suggest either a miracle of human potential or something beyond our current understanding of consciousness itself." The footage played on the conference room's massive screen, accompanied by audio that had been enhanced to capture Lily's performance. The executive sat in stunned silence as the little girl's playing filled the room with haunting beauty. "How quickly can we get this to air?" asked Network President James Crawford, a man whose career had been built on identifying content that generated both ratings and cultural conversation. "That depends on the family's cooperation," Alexis replied. "But I have backup plans if they continue to resist." David learned about the network's intentions through a phone call from Dr. Martinez, who had been contacted by journalists seeking medical commentary on childhood prodigies. "David, I'm getting calls from reporters asking about Lily's psychological evaluation. I've told them nothing, but this suggests they're building a story whether you participate or not." That evening, David stood in Lily's doorway, watching her evening routine, brushing her teeth, choosing pajamas, arranging her stuffed animals with the methodical care she had inherited from Elena. His daughter remained blissfully unaware that her private world was about to be invaded by forces beyond their control. "Daddy," Lily said as he tucked her into bed, "why do people keep calling our house? Carmen seems worried." David felt his heart breaking as he realized that their peaceful existence was about to be shattered. "Some people are very interested in your music, sweetheart, but I want you to know that no matter what happens, I'll always protect you." "Will I still be able to play for Mommy?" "Always," David promised, though he was no longer certain he could keep that promise. As he closed Lily's bedroom door and walked downstairs to his office, David began to understand that protecting his daughter would require resources and strategies far beyond anything his business experience had prepared him for. The media machine had identified them as targets, and the battle for Lily's privacy was about to begin in earnest. Westbrook Academy had been Elena's choice, a prestigious private institution nestled in the hills of Pacific Palisades, where children of celebrities, tech moguls, and old Hollywood families received what administrators proudly called education without boundaries. The campus resembled a small liberal arts college more than an elementary school, with its ivy-covered brick buildings, manicured gardens, and state-of-the-art facilities that included a professional-grade music conservatory. Dr. Patricia Hartwell had served as headmistress for 31 years, transforming Westbrook from a modest private school into one of the most exclusive educational institutions on the West Coast. At 64, she carried herself with the refined bearing of someone born into privilege, her silver hair always perfectly styled, and her wardrobe consisting entirely of tailored suits that projected authority without ostentation. The morning. After news of Lily's musical abilities leaked to the media, Dr. Hartwell received 17 phone calls from reporters seeking comment about their miracle student. By noon, 3 news vans had positioned themselves outside the school's wrought iron gates. Their satellite dishes pointed toward the sky like metallic flowers reaching for attention. "This is completely unacceptable," Dr. Hartwell told her assistant Margaret Summers as they watched from her second-floor office window. The reporters were interviewing parents during pickup time, and several families had already expressed concern about the disruption to their children's educational environment. Margaret, a loyal employee who had worked at Westbrook for over a decade, understood the delicate balance required to maintain the school's reputation among high-profile families. "Should I contact Mr. Chen to discuss the situation?" "Schedule a meeting for tomorrow morning. We need to address this before it spirals further out of control." That afternoon, as Lily walked through the hallways between classes, she began to notice changes in how other children looked at her. Whispers followed her movements, and groups of classmates would fall silent when she approached. Her first-grade teacher, Mrs. Johnson, had been fielding questions from other children about whether Lily was famous or special. 7-year-old Madison Whitmore, daughter of a prominent film producer, cornered Lily during recess with the confident cruelty that often characterized children from powerful families. "My daddy says you're going to be on TV because you can play piano," Madison announced, her blue eyes bright with malicious curiosity. "He says your family is trying to get attention because your mommy died." Lily felt her chest tighten with the familiar pain that accompanied any mention of Elena. "I don't want to be on TV. I just want to play music for my mommy." "But your mommy is dead," Madison continued with the brutal honesty of childhood. "Dead people can't hear music. My daddy says people who talk to dead people are crazy." Mrs. Johnson intervened before Lily could respond, but the damage was done. For the first time since discovering her musical abilities, Lily began to question whether her afternoon conversations with Elena were something shameful, something that made her different in ways that others found disturbing. When David arrived for his meeting with Dr. Hartwell the following morning, he found the headmistress waiting in her office alongside 2 other administrators, the school psychologist and the director of student affairs. The formal nature of the gathering immediately put him on alert. "Mr. Chen, thank you for coming," Dr. Hartwell began, gesturing for him to take a seat in one of the leather chairs arranged around a mahogany conference table. "I'm sure you understand why we've requested this meeting." David surveyed the faces around the table, recognizing the careful neutrality that preceded difficult conversations. "I assume this is about the media attention surrounding my daughter." "Among other concerns," replied Dr. Sandra Phillips, the school psychologist, a woman in her 40s whose specialty was identifying and addressing behavioral issues that might disrupt the academic environment. "Mr. Chen, we've received reports from other parents suggesting that Lily has been discussing supernatural communications with her deceased mother. Several families have expressed concern about the impact of these conversations on their own children." David felt anger rising in his chest. "Dr. Phillips, my daughter is processing grief in her own way. She's not harming anyone or disrupting classroom activities." "Nevertheless," Dr. Hartwell interjected, "we have an obligation to consider the well-being of our entire student body. The media attention alone has created significant disruption, and some parents are questioning whether Westbrook is the appropriate environment for a child with Lily's unique circumstances. What exactly are you suggesting?" David's voice carried the dangerous edge that his business competitors had learned to fear. Dr. Phillips leaned forward, her expression attempting sympathy but achieving only condescension. "Mr. Chen, children who claim to communicate with deceased relatives often require specialized psychological intervention. We're concerned that the extraordinary attention surrounding Lily's musical abilities might be reinforcing potentially unhealthy coping mechanisms. Are you questioning the competence of Dr. Martinez, who has been monitoring Lily's psychological development for 2 years? We're simply suggesting that perhaps a more controlled educational environment, perhaps homeschooling with a therapeutic component, might better serve Lily's needs while protecting the academic atmosphere. We've worked so hard to maintain at Westbrook, David realized with crystalline clarity that they were asking him to remove his daughter from school not because she was struggling, but because her extraordinary circumstances threatened the comfortable predictability that other wealthy families paid enormous tuition fees to ensure. "Let me understand this correctly," David said, his voice becoming increasingly cold. "You're suggesting that my daughter, who maintains excellent grades and has never caused a behavioral problem, should be removed from school because other parents are uncomfortable with her method of processing grief?" Dr. Hartwell's composure faltered slightly. "Mr. Chen, we're not asking you to remove Lily permanently. We're simply suggesting that perhaps a temporary break until the media attention subsides and she's received appropriate psychological evaluation might be beneficial for everyone involved. Dr. Hartwell, my family has been part of this community for 4 years. We've contributed financially to every capital campaign and participated in every fundraising event. Now you're asking us to leave because my daughter's trauma recovery doesn't conform to your standards of normalcy." The director of student affairs, a nervous man named Thomas Bradley, who had been silent throughout the meeting, finally spoke up. "Mr. Chen, we've also received reports that some children are now claiming to have their own supernatural experiences after speaking with Lily. Parents are concerned that these ideas are spreading among impressionable young minds." David stood abruptly, his patience finally exhausted. "Gentlemen, Dr. Hartwell, let me be perfectly clear. My daughter will continue attending Westbrook Academy as long as she wishes to do so. If you attempt to force her withdrawal based on prejudice against her grieving process, you'll discover exactly how much legal trouble my resources can create for this institution." Dr. Hartwell's face flushed with indignation. "Mr. Chen, threats are hardly appropriate in an educational setting. Neither is discrimination against a child whose only crime is processing loss in ways that make adults uncomfortable." David moved toward the door, then turned back to face the assembled administrators. "My daughter lost her mother at age 4 and has found a way to maintain emotional stability through music. If that threatens your carefully controlled environment, perhaps you should examine what kind of values you're actually teaching these children." As David left the building, he could hear the murmur of conversation resuming behind him. He knew that the battle lines had been drawn, and that Lily's continued attendance at Westbrook would become another front in their war for privacy and normalcy. That afternoon, when he picked up Lily from school, he noticed that she seemed more withdrawn than usual. During their drive home along the Pacific Coast Highway, with the ocean stretching endlessly to their left, she finally spoke. "Daddy, why do people think it's bad that I talk to Mommy when I play piano?" David felt his heart breaking as he realized that the adult conflicts surrounding her gift were beginning to contaminate the pure joy she found in music. "Some people don't understand that love doesn't end just because someone dies, sweetheart. They think that because they can't hear Mommy's voice, you shouldn't be able to either. But I can hear her. Daddy, she tells me she's proud of how I'm growing up, and she sings along when I play her favorite songs." David pulled into their driveway and turned to face his daughter, seeing Elena's gentle wisdom reflected in her dark eyes. "Lily, I want you to know that whatever anyone else thinks, I believe you. And I'll never let anyone make you feel ashamed of the special connection you have with Mommy." That evening, as Lily practiced her afternoon musical ritual, David made a decision that would fundamentally alter their lives. If protecting his daughter meant isolating her from a community that couldn't accept her extraordinary circumstances, then isolation was a price he was willing to pay. But as he watched her small figure silhouetted against the window, playing music that seemed to bridge the gap between earth and heaven, David began to understand that their real battle wasn't against media, attention, or school administrators. It was for the right to grieve and heal in ways that honored the depth of their loss, rather than conforming to society's timeline for recovery. June arrived in Malibu with its characteristic marine layer, shrouding the coastal mountains in a grey mist that seemed to mirror the uncertainty hanging over the Chen household. For 2 weeks, the piano in Lily's room had remained untouched, its polished surface reflecting the afternoon sunlight that no longer accompanied the sound of music. David had first noticed the change on a Tuesday morning when 3 p.m. came and went without the familiar sound of classical melodies drifting through the house. He had waited in his office, watching the security monitors with growing anxiety as Lily entered her room, looked at the piano for a long moment, then quietly selected a book and settled into her reading chair instead. Maybe she just needs a day off. Carmen had suggested that evening as they watched Lily pick at her dinner, grilled salmon with vegetables that Elena used to prepare, now seeming to hold no appeal. Even grown-up musicians take breaks from playing, but one day became 3, then a week, then 2 weeks of profound musical silence that seemed to echo through every corner of the mansion. The house felt different without Lily's afternoon concerts, as if some essential life force had been drained from its walls. Dr. Martinez arrived for an emergency consultation on a Thursday morning, her usually composed demeanor betraying genuine concern. She had been monitoring Lily's case closely since David's call describing the complete cessation of musical activity. "How has she been sleeping?" Dr. Martinez asked as they sat in David's office, watching Lily through the window as she listlessly pushed a swing in the backyard. "Restless. She's been having nightmares again for the first time in months," David replied, his voice hoarse from sleepless nights spent worrying. "She wakes up calling for Elena, but when I go to comfort her, she won't talk about the dreams." Dr. Martinez made notes in her tablet, her expression growing more troubled with each detail. "And her appetite?" "Diminished. She's eating enough to stay healthy, but she shows no enthusiasm for food she used to enjoy." David rubbed his temples, fighting off another tension headache. "Sarah, I'm scared." "It's like she's retreating back into the shell she was in immediately after Elena's death. David, I need to ask this directly. Has anything changed in her environment? Any new stresses or disruptions that might have triggered this regression?" David felt the familiar weight of guilt settling on his shoulders. The media attention has intensified. There have been reporters calling the house, cameras outside the school gates. Some of the other parents have been less than supportive. Dr. Martinez looked up from her notes, her expression sharp with concern. "Define less than supportive." David recounted the meeting at Westbrook Academy and the conversations Lily had overheard from other children questioning her communications with Elena. As he spoke, Dr. Martinez's face grew increasingly grave. "David, what you're describing is a traumatic invalidation of Lily's primary coping mechanism. She's been told both directly and indirectly that the thing bringing her comfort and connection to her mother is abnormal or shameful. But I've told her repeatedly that I support her, that I believe her experiences are real and valid. That's important. But children are incredibly sensitive to social rejection, especially from peers. If her schoolmates are suggesting that talking to her mother is crazy or wrong, then she may have internalized those messages despite your support." Dr. Martinez suggested they bring in Dr. Elena Vasquez, a child psychologist who specialized in grief therapy and had experience working with children who displayed extraordinary abilities following trauma. The consultation was scheduled for the following Monday, but David felt a growing sense of urgency as Lily's withdrawal deepened with each passing day. That weekend, David made a decision that reflected his growing desperation. He cancelled all his professional commitments and devoted himself entirely to spending time with Lily, hoping that his undivided attention might help her open up about what had changed. On Saturday morning, they walked along the beach below their house, Lily's small hand in his, as waves crashed against the shore with hypnotic regularity. The ocean had always been one of Elena's favorite places, She had proposed to David on this very stretch of sand 5 years earlier, promising to love him as endlessly as the tides. "Lily, can you tell me why you stopped playing piano?" David asked gently as they sat on a piece of driftwood, worn smooth by countless storms. Lily was quiet for so long that David wondered if she had heard the question. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely audible above the sound of the waves. "Because maybe they're right. Daddy, maybe Mommy isn't really there." David felt his heart shatter as he realized the depth of doubt that others had planted in his daughter's mind. "Sweetheart, what made you think that?" Madison said that talking to dead people means you're crazy. Mrs. Phillips at school said, I need special help because normal kids don't hear voices." Lily's eyes filled with tears that she had been holding back for weeks. "And the man with the camera said I was pretending for attention." David pulled his daughter into his arms, feeling her small body trembling with the weight of confusion and shame that no 6-year-old should carry. "Lily, look at me. Those people don't understand what you and Mommy share. They can't hear her voice because they didn't love her the way we do. But what if I'm just pretending? What if I made it all up because I miss her so much?" The question revealed the devastating self-doubt that had been growing in Lily's mind, fed by weeks of external skepticism and social pressure. David realized that in trying to protect her gift, he had failed to protect her confidence in its validity. "Lily, do you remember the day we found Mommy's old jewelry box in the attic? The one with the music box dancer that plays for Elise?" Lily nodded, wiping her nose on the sleeve of her sweatshirt. "You played that exact piece the next day, note for note, even though you had never heard it before that moment. How would you explain that if Mommy wasn't somehow guiding your hands?" "I don't know," Lily whispered. "I just don't know anymore." That evening, Carmen found David sitting alone in the living room, staring at the space where Elena used to practice her yoga routine. The housekeeper had been watching the family's struggle with growing heartache, seeing how the external pressures were destroying the peace they had fought so hard to achieve. "Mr. Chen, may I speak freely?" Carmen asked, settling into the chair across from him. David nodded, grateful for any perspective that might help him understand how to reach his daughter. "When I was Lily's age in El Salvador, my grandmother used to say that children are born with 1 foot in this world and 1 foot in the spirit world. As they grow older, society teaches them to pull both feet into this world and forget about the other." Carmen's voice carried the weight of folk wisdom passed down through generations. Maybe Lily is not losing her gift. Maybe she's learning to hide it because she's been taught it's not acceptable. "What are you suggesting?" "That you take her somewhere the world can't reach her. Somewhere she can remember what she knew before everyone told her it was impossible." David spent that night researching retreat centers and remote locations where they might escape the pressures that had contaminated Lily's connection to her mother. By morning, he had made a decision that would have seemed impossible just weeks earlier. He was going to abandon his business responsibilities entirely and take his daughter somewhere they could rediscover the peace they had lost. But first, he needed to understand exactly what damage had been done to Lily's emotional well-being. The appointment with Dr. Vasquez couldn't come soon enough, and David found himself praying to whatever force had given his daughter her extraordinary gift, begging for guidance on how to restore what others had taken from her. As he watched Lily sleep that night, her face peaceful in the moonlight streaming through her bedroom window, David made a silent promise that he would do whatever it took to help her find her way back to the music that had been healing them both, even if it meant leaving behind everything he had built to create a sanctuary where love could transcend the boundaries that others insisted were absolute. The piano sat silent in the corner, waiting for the day when small hands would once again bring it to life with melodies that bridged the gap between earth and heaven. Carmen Rodriguez stood at the edge of the garden on a fog-shrouded morning in late June, her weathered hands clutching a cup of coffee that had grown cold as she wrestled with a decision that could change everything. For 3 days, she had watched David pace through the house like a caged animal, making phone calls to psychologists and researching treatment facilities with the desperate intensity of a man trying to solve an unsolvable puzzle. The truth she carried felt like a stone in her chest, heavy, sharp-edged, and impossible to ignore. She had promised herself she would take this secret to her grave. But watching Lily retreat deeper into silence with each passing day had finally broken her resolve. "Mr. Chen," Carmen called softly as David emerged from his office, his usually immaculate appearance disheveled from another sleepless night. "I need to tell you something. Something I should have shared weeks ago." David looked up from his phone, where he had been reviewing treatment options for childhood trauma. The dark circles under his eyes and the slight tremor in his hands revealed the toll that his daughter's regression was taking on his own mental health. "Carmen, if this is about finding a new therapist, I've already scheduled consultations with 3 specialists in Los Angeles and 2 in San Francisco. Dr. Martinez thinks—" "Mr. Chen, please." Carmen's voice carried an urgency that cut through his frantic planning. "This isn't about doctors. This is about what I saw 3 days before Lily stopped playing." Something in Carmen's tone made David set down his phone and give her his full attention. In the 3 years she had worked for their family, he had never seen her look so conflicted, so burdened by unspoken knowledge. "What did you see?" Carmen glanced toward the staircase, ensuring that Lily was still in her room, then gestured for David to follow her into the garden. The morning marine layer hung low over the ocean, creating a sense of isolation that made their conversation feel like a confession in a cathedral of mist. "The day before everything changed, I was bringing clean laundry to Lily's room," Carmen began, her voice barely above a whisper. "She was sitting in the garden, right there by the rose bushes Mrs. Chen planted. She was holding that silver-framed photograph of her mother, the one from their last Christmas together." David felt his chest tighten. That particular photograph had disappeared from Lily's nightstand weeks ago, and he had assumed she had simply moved it somewhere private. She was crying. Mr. Chen, not the loud crying of a child having a tantrum, but the quiet, heartbroken crying of someone carrying pain too heavy for their small shoulders. Carmen's own eyes filled with tears as she recalled the scene. "I was going to go to her, but then I heard her talking to the photograph. What did she say?" Carmen took a shaky breath before continuing. She said, "Mommy, I'm scared I'm going to forget what you look like. When I play piano and talk to you, I can almost see your face, but it's getting harder. Madison says talking to dead people is crazy, and Mrs. Phillips thinks I need special doctors. What if they're right? What if I'm broken?" David felt the ground shift beneath his feet as he realized the devastating fear that had been growing in his daughter's heart. The very gift that had brought her comfort was now the source of her deepest anxiety. "There's more," Carmen continued, her voice breaking with emotion. "Lily told the photograph that she was afraid that playing piano might make her forget her mother's real face, that maybe the music was just her imagination trying to fill the empty space where Mrs. Chen used to be." The words hit David like physical blows. All this time, he had been focused on protecting Lily's gift from external threats, never realizing that the real danger came from her own growing self-doubt. She kissed the photograph and promised her mother that she would stop playing until she was sure it was really Mrs. Chen she was talking to and not just her own lonely heart. Pretending. Carmen wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. "Mr. Chen, that little girl is so afraid of dishonoring her mother's memory by creating false connections that she's willing to give up the only thing that brings her peace." David sank onto the stone bench where Eleanor used to sit and read while Lily played in the garden. The weight of understanding crashed over him in waves. His daughter hadn't lost her gift. She had deliberately severed her connection to it out of love and respect for her mother's memory. "Why didn't you tell me this sooner?" David asked, though his tone carried no accusation, only exhausted gratitude for the truth. "Because I hoped she would find her way back on her own." "And because," Carmen hesitated, then sat beside him on the bench, "because I knew that once you understood what was really happening, you would move heaven and earth to fix it, even if it meant turning your whole life upside down." David stared out at the ocean, where the morning fog was beginning to lift, revealing patches of brilliant blue sky. For the first time in weeks, he felt clarity cutting through his panic and confusion. "Carmen, what would you do if Lily were your granddaughter?" I would take her somewhere far from all these voices, telling her what's normal and what's crazy. Somewhere she could remember that love doesn't follow the rules that grown-ups, and try to make for it. Carmen's voice carried the wisdom of someone who had watched children navigate loss across cultures and generations. "Mr. Chen, your daughter needs to learn that her connection to her mother is sacred, not strange. But she can't learn that here, surrounded by people who are afraid of anything they can't understand." That afternoon, David made a series of phone calls that would have seemed impossible just hours earlier. He spoke with his board of directors, informing them that he would be taking an indefinite leave of absence from Neural Sync to address a family emergency. He contacted his attorneys to ensure that all business operations could continue without his daily oversight. Most importantly, he called his brother Michael, who lived in a small mountain town in Colorado, where traditions of folk music and storytelling still thrived in communities that valued mystery over explanation. "Michael, I need your help," David said during the call. "I need to bring Lily somewhere she can heal without the world watching and judging." Michael Chen had always been the more grounded of the two brothers, choosing a simple life as a high school music teacher in Aspen over the tech industry success that David had pursued. His warm laugh carried the peace that David had forgotten was possible. "David, you know you're always welcome here. The Summer Folk Festival starts next month, and there are musicians here who understand that music can heal things that medicine can't touch." Michael paused thoughtfully. "But are you sure you're ready to step away from everything you've built?" David looked through his office window toward Lily's room, where his daughter sat reading quietly, her small form seeming almost translucent in the afternoon light. "Michael, I built that company to provide security for my family. But what good is financial security if I lose my daughter's spirit in the process?" David's voice carried a conviction that surprised him with its strength. "The 18 months of business I'll miss are worth nothing compared to helping Lily remember who she is." That evening, David sat on Lily's bed as she prepared for sleep, her nighttime routine now devoid of the peaceful contentment that had characterized the weeks when music filled her afternoons. "Lily, how would you feel about taking a trip with me? Just the two of us, to a place where people understand that love can take many different forms." Lily looked up from the book she had been pretending to read. "Would we have to talk to doctors there?" No doctors unless you want to talk to them. Just mountains and music and people who believe that some of the most important things in life can't be explained, only experienced." For the first time in weeks, David saw a spark of interest in his daughter's eyes. "Would I be allowed to play piano there?" If you want to. But only because it brings you joy, not because anyone expects you to perform or prove anything." Lily considered this for a long moment, her 6-year-old mind weighing possibilities that seemed to offer hope where there had been only confusion. "Daddy, do you think Mommy would be able to find me in the mountains?" David felt tears threatening as he realized that his daughter's greatest fear was not about losing her gift, but about losing her connection to Elena's love. "Sweetheart, Mommy's love isn't tied to any particular place or piano. It lives in your heart, and your heart goes wherever you go." As he tucked Lily into bed that night, David began planning their escape from a world that had taught his daughter to question the very thing that was helping her survive her grief. In the mountains of Colorado, surrounded by people who understood that music could be a bridge between worlds. Perhaps Lily could remember that her mother's love was not a delusion to be cured, but a gift to be cherished. The drive from Malibu to Aspen took 2 days, winding through desert landscapes that gradually gave way to pine forests and snow-capped peaks that seemed to touch the sky. David had chosen to drive rather than fly, recognizing that Lily needed time to decompress from the pressures that had been suffocating her spirit. Carmen had packed their belongings with the efficiency of someone who understood that this journey represented more than a vacation. It was a pilgrimage toward healing. "I can help Mrs. Chen find you wherever you go," Carmen had whispered to Lily as they said goodbye, pressing a small wooden cross into the child's palm. "Love travels on the wind, Misha. It knows no borders." Michael Chen's cabin sat on 3 acres of aspen groves, 20 minutes outside of town, where the altitude made every breath feel crisp and clean. At 35, Michael had inherited their father's gentle temperament without David's driving ambition, choosing a life that valued relationships over achievements. His rustic home was filled with musical instruments from around the world: guitars, fiddles, Native American flutes, and an old, upright piano that had belonged to their grandmother. "Welcome to God's country," Michael said as David's Tesla navigated the gravel driveway, looking oddly futuristic among the log cabins and rustic mailboxes that defined their neighborhood. "How are you holding up, little one?" he asked Lily as she emerged from the car, her eyes wide with wonder at the towering peaks surrounding them. "It's so quiet here," Lily observed, her voice carrying the first note of peace David had heard from her in weeks. "I can hear birds singing, but I can't hear any cars or phones ringing." "That's exactly the point," Michael replied, lifting Lily's suitcase with the easy strength of someone who chopped his own firewood and grew his own vegetables. "Sometimes our hearts need silence before they can remember how to make their own music." The first week passed in a blur of simple pleasures that David had almost forgotten existed. They hiked mountain trails where wildflowers painted meadows in impossible colors, visited local markets where elderly craftsmen carved instruments from wood that had grown for centuries, and attended evening gatherings where neighbors shared stories and songs that had been passed down through generations. Lily remained largely silent during these early days, but David noticed subtle changes in her demeanor. Her shoulders seemed less tense, her sleep more peaceful, and occasionally he would catch her humming melodies under her breath, fragments of songs she had heard at community gatherings rather than the complex classical pieces that had once flowed through her. The turning point came during their second week, when Michael introduced them to Samuel Winters, a 73-year-old fiddler who had become the unofficial guardian of the region's musical heritage. Samuel lived in a modest cabin where every wall was lined with instruments, sheet music, and photographs of musicians who had long since passed into legend. "So you're the young lady with the musical gift," Samuel said when they visited his home on a Thursday afternoon. His weathered face was kind but serious, and his blue eyes held the depth of someone who had spent decades listening to stories told through song. "Your uncle tells me you've been having some troubles with your music." Lily nodded shyly, staying close to David's side as she surveyed the collection of instruments that seemed to hold secrets in their silent strings and wooden bodies. "Can I tell you something, little one? The best musicians I've ever known weren't the ones who played the fanciest pieces or performed on the biggest stages. They were the ones who understood that music is just another way of praying, another way of talking to the people we love." Samuel picked up an ancient fiddle, its wood darkened with age and use. "This belonged to my great-grandmother, who came here from Ireland in 1892. She used to say that when she played the old songs, she could hear her mother's voice singing along from across the ocean." He drew the bow across the strings, producing a melody that was both haunting and comforting, a song that spoke of longing and love that transcended physical separation. Was she crazy for believing she could hear her mother's voice? Samuel asked Lily gently. Lily shook her head, captivated by the music and the story it told. Neither are you, child. Love doesn't die just because the body stops breathing. It just finds new ways to express itself. Over the following days, Samuel began teaching Lily simple folk melodies that told stories of ordinary people facing extraordinary losses. Unlike the classical pieces she had played in Malibu, these songs carried narratives she could understand. Tales of mothers who watched over their children from heaven, fathers who sent signs through the wind, and lovers who found each other again in fields of wildflowers. These songs have been sung by people who knew grief, Samuel explained, as Lily tentatively picked out a melody on his grandmother's fiddle. They're not fancy or complicated, but they carry the weight of real human experience. David watched from the cabin's porch as his daughter slowly began to rediscover her connection to music, this time without the pressure of perfection or the fear of judgment. The folk melodies seemed to unlock something in Lily that had been frozen by doubt, a recognition that her musical abilities were not a burden to be analyzed, but a gift to be shared. The transformation became evident during the third week, when the community held its monthly music circle in the town square. Families gathered on blankets as the sun set behind the mountains, creating a natural amphitheater where stories and songs were shared without pretense or performance anxiety. Lily had been content to listen during previous gatherings, but that evening something shifted. When Samuel announced that anyone who wished to share a song was welcome, Lily surprised everyone by raising her small hand. "I'd like to play something for my mommy," she said, her voice carrying across the square with clarity that silenced the gentle conversations. Samuel handed her his grandmother's fiddle, and Lily stood in the center of the circle with the confidence of someone who had rediscovered her purpose. The melody she played was a fusion of the Irish folk song Samuel had taught her and fragments of a Chopin nocturne she had once performed in her bedroom. The result was unlike anything the gathered community had ever heard: classical sophistication woven through with folk authenticity, creating music that spoke to both the mind and the heart. As Lily played, her face lost the tension that had characterized her final weeks in Malibu. Her eyes were closed, but her expression was one of peaceful communication rather than desperate searching. When she finished, the silence that followed was not awkward, but reverent, as if everyone present recognized they had witnessed something sacred. That was beautiful. "Sweetheart," called out Maria Santos, a local teacher whose own daughter had been born with special needs. "Your mommy must be so proud." For the first time in months, Lily smiled with genuine joy. "I can feel her pride," she said simply. "It feels warm, like sunshine." David felt his own eyes filling with tears as he realized that his daughter had found her way back to Elena not through the complex classical pieces that had amazed experts, but through simple melodies that honored the emotional truth of her experience. After the music circle ended and they were walking back to Michael's cabin under a canopy of stars more brilliant than any David had ever seen in Los Angeles, Lily slipped her hand into his. "Daddy, I think I was wrong before. I don't think the music comes from my imagination. I think it comes from the part of Mommy that lives in my heart." David stopped walking and knelt beside his daughter, seeing Eleanor's wisdom reflected in her dark eyes. "What made you realize that?" "Because when I played tonight, I wasn't trying to prove anything or show how good I was. I was just telling Mommy that I love her and miss her. And the music that came out was exactly what I needed to say." As they continued their walk home, David began to understand that the real gift his daughter possessed was not her technical ability, but her capacity to transform grief into beauty, to create bridges between earthly life and eternal love through the universal language of music. In the mountains of Colorado, surrounded by people who understood that some of life's most important truths couldn't be measured or explained. Lily was learning to trust the voice of her heart rather than the doubts planted by others. The piano in Malibu could wait, for now. The simple songs of mountain folk were teaching her everything she needed to know about the power of love to transcend physical boundaries. The Summer Folk Festival arrived in Aspen during the first week of August, transforming the mountain town into a living celebration of musical heritage that had been passed down through generations. The main stage was erected in a natural amphitheater surrounded by aspen groves, where thousands of visitors gathered to hear everything from Celtic ballads to Native American chants, bluegrass harmonies to classical crossover performances. David stood at the edge of the festival grounds on opening night, watching families spread blankets on the grass while children ran between food vendors selling kettle corn and homemade crafts. The scene was a stark contrast to the corporate entertainment industry he knew from Los Angeles. Here, music was about community and connection rather than profit and publicity. "It's something, isn't it?" Michael said, joining his brother as they watched Lily help Samuel tune his collection of fiddles backstage. Over the past month, she had become his unofficial apprentice, learning not just melodies, but the stories behind each song, the history embedded in every traditional tune. "I've been thinking about something," David replied, his voice carrying a thoughtfulness that had developed during their weeks in the mountains. "For years, I measured success by how much I could control, how many variables I could predict and manage. But watching Lily heal here has taught me that the most important things in life can't be controlled. They can only be experienced." That evening, as the festival's opening concert began, Lily sat cross-legged on a blanket beside David, her face glowing with anticipation. The first performers were a family bluegrass band, whose youngest member was only 8 years old, playing guitar with the unself-conscious joy that characterized authentic folk music. "Daddy, look how happy they look when they play together," Lily observed, her voice filled with wonder. "It's like the music is making them glow from the inside." David watched his daughter's face as she absorbed the performance, noting how different her expression was from the intense, almost trance-like concentration she had displayed during her classical piano sessions in Malibu. Here her appreciation was relaxed and joyful, free from the weight of expectation or analysis. The festival's second night featured a special tribute to traditional mountain music, with Samuel Winters serving as the evening's host and storyteller. As he took the stage with his great-grandmother's fiddle, the crowd fell silent with respect for the elderly musician who had become a living repository of cultural memory. "Tonight, I want to tell you about the power of music to heal wounds that medicine can't touch," Samuel began, his voice carrying clearly across the amphitheater. "We have with us a young lady who has learned that the most beautiful music comes not from perfection, but from the courage to express what lives in our hearts." David felt his breath catch as he realized that Samuel was preparing to invite Lily to perform. They hadn't discussed this possibility, and David's protective instincts immediately activated. "Lily Chen, would you join me on stage?" Samuel called, extending his hand toward their section of the audience. David looked at his daughter, ready to politely decline on her behalf, but saw something in her eyes that stopped him. There was no fear, no pressure, only a quiet confidence that had been growing throughout their mountain sojourn. "I'd like to try, Daddy," Lily said softly, "but only if you think it's okay." David realized that this moment represented everything they had been working toward, not a return to the extraordinary technical displays that had amazed experts, but an opportunity for his daughter to share her gift in an environment that valued emotional authenticity over performance perfection. "If you want to play, then I want to hear you play," David replied, helping her navigate through the seated crowd toward the stage. Samuel welcomed Lily with a grandfatherly embrace, then handed her a small mountain dulcimer that had been crafted by local artisans. Play whatever your heart tells you to play, little one. These folks don't need to be impressed. They just need to be touched. Lily settled onto the stool beside Samuel, her small hands finding their way across the dulcimer's strings with the same natural grace she had always displayed at the piano. But instead of launching into a complex classical piece, she began with the simple Irish melody Samuel had taught her during their first meeting. As the hauntingly beautiful notes drifted across the amphitheatre, Lily began to weave in harmonies and variations that transformed the traditional tune into something entirely her own. Her playing was technically sophisticated but emotionally accessible, creating music that spoke to hearts rather than analyzing minds. Halfway through the performance, something magical happened. Lily began to sing, not words, but a wordless melody that seemed to carry the voice of every mother who had ever loved a child, every person who had ever experienced loss and found their way to acceptance. The audience sat in profound silence, many wiping away tears as they recognized the universal language of grief transformed into beauty. But David noticed that his daughter's face held no sadness. Instead, she radiated the peaceful joy of someone who had found her authentic voice. When the music concluded, the silence stretched for several heartbeats before erupting into applause that seemed to come from the mountains themselves. But Lily barely seemed to notice the audience response. She was looking directly at David, her eyes bright with the confidence of someone who had rediscovered her purpose. "I felt her, Daddy," Lily said when she rejoined him after the performance. "Not like before, when I was trying so hard to hear her voice. This time, it was like she was singing along with me, like we were making music together." David hugged his daughter, understanding that they had reached the culmination of their journey toward healing. The extraordinary technical abilities were still there, but they were now grounded in emotional wisdom that would serve her far better than raw talent alone. The following morning, as they prepared to return to California, David made a phone call that would have seemed impossible 3 months earlier. He contacted the producers at Gold Star Entertainment, informing them that the Chen family would not be participating in any media projects now or in the future. "Mr. Chen, surely you understand the opportunities we could provide for your daughter," Alexis Kane argued during their final conversation. "She could inspire millions of children, become a global ambassador for music education." "Ms. Kane, my daughter doesn't need to inspire millions of children. She needs to grow up as a normal little girl who happens to have an extraordinary gift," David replied, with the calm authority of someone who had finally understood what truly mattered. "Her music isn't entertainment, it's how she maintains her connection to her mother's love." As they drove down from the mountains, Lily dozed in the passenger seat while David reflected on how fundamentally their lives had changed. The 18 months of business he had missed seemed insignificant compared to witnessing his daughter's journey from traumatized silence through extraordinary abilities to authentic self-expression. When they arrived home in Malibu, Carmen greeted them with tears of joy, immediately noting the peace that had returned to Lily's demeanor. The mansion felt different too, less like a sterile showcase and more like a home where love could flourish without explanation or justification. That afternoon, for the first time in months, Lily approached the Steinway piano in her bedroom. But instead of sitting down to play a complex classical piece, she opened the bench and retrieved a small wooden flute that Samuel had given her as a farewell gift. Standing by her window overlooking the Pacific Ocean, she played the simple Irish melody that had become her musical prayer, her way of maintaining connection to Elena's memory while honoring her own growth and healing. David listened from the hallway, understanding that his daughter had found something far more valuable than prodigious talent. She had discovered how to transform grief into grace, how to honor the past while embracing the future, and how to trust the voice of love that speaks through music when words are insufficient. The extraordinary chapter of their lives was not ending. but evolving into something even more beautiful. A story of healing that proved love could indeed transcend physical boundaries, finding expression through the hands and heart of a little girl who had learned to play not for fame or recognition, but for the simple joy of keeping her mother's memory alive through music. Leave your like, subscribe to the channel, hit the notification bell, and if you watched until here, comment, "I watched until here," and leave your opinion about this story. Oh, and don't forget to watch the next video that appears on the end screen. It's very exciting for you.